Here we are with it is Dr. Joseph Cibelli,
Correct.
correct?
As of
Yeah.
December 12th. Yes, sir.
Yeah, for both of us that year that I got my doctorate. This
Congrats,
Thank
doctor.
you. Thank you. So, you're a forensic psychologist?
Technically, I have a PhD in forensic psychology. I do not do clinical work. I only do the research end. So, I mean,
Okay.
I can talk to people about things and I can administer testing, but I can't technically diagnose or anything because I'm not clinical.
Okay. Purely a forensic psychologist then.
Yep,
Excellent.
absolutely.
So this is criminal behaviorology, Dr. Joseph Cibelli, and he has written a very interesting book, and I think the viewers are going to love this. It's about the 1980s, the Tylenol poisonings, the Tylenol murders is the name of your book, correct?
Correct. The Tylenol murders, a father's confession to his son.
So that title is giving you some very critical information about this. I'm going to go ahead and let you tell us, how all this started for you. You had uh, but perhaps we should say, background of the Tylenol
Mhm.
poisonings, because I remember talking about this in, well, let's see, it was junior high, middle school for us then, gym class. We were walking back, and I remember us talking about this. And before that, the Tylenol poisonings happened, I do remember nearly all the products, maybe not carbonated beverage, but I think the milk jugs, the medicine, everything just had maybe a child plastic difficult to open, but before that they weren't sealed.
No, they were not, unfortunately. So, yeah, that was 1982, and it was a different world then. And
Hmm.
I constantly am reminding people that the news, we didn't have 24/7 coverage. We didn't have a cell phone in our pocket with social media in our face. You watched the news on TV, you read the paper, and that was it. And so I think when I was in that era, I mean, we knew what was going on because it was
Hmm.
all around us. I had
Hmm.
I had looked at a map with all of the locations of where the bottles were purchased in our house. I mean, our address is kind of smack in the center of almost all of that.
Hmm.
So, doing forensic psychology now, I tend to like to start at the end and work backwards, if that's okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine. I was just gonna, and people can, this day and age, you can look it up, but yeah, the Tylenol poisonings were a huge story,
Oh, massive.
as huge as story could be in that area of Tylenol tablets being poisoned somehow
Mhm.
with cyanide, and
Correct.
people unsuspecting consumers, regular consumers of Tylenol, I think it was extra strength Tylenol, were
Mhm.
ingesting this, and then of course Tylenol cyanide is one of the deadliest poisons, and
Absolutely. It did not take very long at all for it to
uh,
begin.
okay.
So, the way this all kind of started for me was, my father was dying. He had pancreatic cancer, and we really didn't have any type of a relationship after about 2015.
Mhm.
And um, he was in his hospice bed. He was very heavily medicated, and I think that the medication, it loosened him up. And I think at this point, he was finally, at this point, he was realizing, this is it for me. Prior to this event, even a few weeks before that, he was sure he was going to kick this cancer. So death was definitely impending for him. So he kind of just sat there, and he sat up and he said, cyanide pills, I did it. And everybody was, wait, what? One of the nurses that was there attending had just totally freaked out because they had thought he meant he put cyanide in his own pills. So there
Yeah.
was all this kerfuffle around it. So he kind of was drifting in and out of consciousness. And then he was crying. And I mean, my father was definitely, he was not a crier. He showed no
Yeah.
emotion ever.
Yeah.
And, on his deathbed, it makes sense that he would be crying and, thinking about things. And he said, this just gives me the goosebumps. He said, the three Marys should still be here. One of them was so young.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not there when he said that. And my brother told me what he said. And I said, oh my God, you've got to read what I'm writing. And so it makes sense because the three of the victims were named Mary.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was 12 years old, and I was 11 at the time when the murders happened. So she was my age. And then, he was drifted in and out again. And he had this whole, he kept going on about, like, I'm going to get blamed for something. I'm going to get blamed for something. And his actual words were, it might be a year, it might be 10 years, but I'm going to be blamed for something. So I'm just going to admit it now. And he said, cyanide pills, I did it. It was me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was point blank, right to the point, drifting back in and out. And then he was staring down the hall. And this is what, out of all of that, it's all very profound what he said, but this is what just gave me the chills. He was looking down the hall and he said, if you know what I did and you didn't do anything, you should be ashamed of yourself. You would be the monster. And I feel like that was for me.
Mm-hmm.
About 2019, I feel like my father thought I was going to put this together. And I think this was for me. He literally had just said, cyanide pills, I did it, it was me. And then he's giving this admonition about, if you know this and you don't do anything about it, you're the monster.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be very much like him to turn it around on somebody else, be like, oh no, it's your fault. You didn't stop me, so it's all on you.
Mm-hmm.
That was his mentality. So that was on, oddly enough, it was September 29th, 2023, which was the 41st anniversary. Was it 23? Yeah, it was the 41st anniversary of the murders. September 29th was the very first day that somebody died. And that was the day he said this. It was almost as if he had been holding on to this. And at that point, facing the impending death, he said, no, I got to get this out there. And then it was 10 days later, not even, I think it was 9 days later is when he died. So he carried this with him. So then to go back to 1982, as soon as he said it the first time about the cyanide pills, my hair stood up and I'm like, I knew it. I knew he did this. I had suspected it in 1982.
Mm-hmm.
In the book, I have a lot of very strange outings with my father, my brother, and myself. One of them is at Lincoln Park Zoo. One of them, and I always call this the ground zero for him, was Bussey Woods, which is it's a big, beautiful forest preserve. And if you look at that from the air, and I've done this like 1,000 times now, you look at it from the air, and if you plug in the addresses of the three locations where the bottles were found near there, one was Elk Grove Village, and that is the one that killed Mary Kellerman. Arlington Heights, which killed the 3 members of the Janus family. And then at Woodfield Mall, there were 2 bottles found at the Osco drug there, but nobody had died from those. They're literally, you can see Bussey Woods, and here are the locations. They're literally right along the perimeter of there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very odd excursion that day. And my brother was very young still. He was not even 4, and he still remembers us sitting there. There was a scene in the book. There were bikers that were in the woods, and my dad took my brother and myself out into the woods, got us set up, and he's like, okay, you got to stay here. And I'm like, where are you going? What are you doing? And he's, nope, you got to stay here for 1 hour. You got to sit here for 1 hour. Be quiet, because those are dangerous people. My brother remembers the bikers. My brother remembers us sitting there. And
Like biker gang type of guys?
I would say, like,
They were motorcycle
I wouldn't
riders?
I wouldn't say they were Hell's Angels or anything like that. They
Yeah,
were
but
just, there was a bunch of, motorcycles in the parking lot there. And then these people were out there. And honestly, and I really went into this in the book, I was kind of envious of them, because they're out there having a good time. Nobody's, threatening anybody. Nobody's, beating anybody up. And I was like, oh, they've got this freedom. They can just get on their bikes and ride, and off they go. And I was not scared of them, but I was scared that they would see 2 small children in the woods alone and start asking questions. And that would have been the worst thing, because then I would have had to cover somehow. Why are you here alone? Those are the questions we wanted to avoid. We never wanted to be questioned about anything with relating to him. So it was after that, we had a whole day of adventure with my father that day. So we got home. He's carrying my brother. My brother is sleeping, and we're going up the front steps, right? My father I was pretty tall at that age, but he bent down kind of and looked me right in the face, got right up in my face. And he said, if you ever tell anybody about what went down today, I will kill you. I will kill your mother, and I will
Mm-hmm.
kill your brother and sister.
Mm-hmm.
Understood?
Mm-hmm.
And it was at that point, and that was, right before the murders happened. I kind of started to distance myself from him. But it was at that moment, and I was 11 years old. That moment was when I realized, like, my father is capable of this.
Yeah.
So shortly thereafter is when the murders started happening. And it was very silent about that in our house. People talked at school, like you had mentioned. People talked at school. People talked on the streets. People talked in the grocery store. But we really didn't have any discussion about it in our home.
And if I'm getting this right, you're kind of saying at least on some of the times of him planting these deadly Tylenol capsules, he took his kids along.
Oh, absolutely. We were
Yeah.
his cover. We were his
Yeah.
cover.
Okay.
When you read the book and you get to the Lincoln Park Zoo story where he left us there, I mean, 8 blocks from Lincoln Park Zoo is the Walgreens on Wells Street. Next door to that is Dominic's, and Dominic's is a grocery store, was a grocery store. His story that day was that he didn't have cash and he was going to go cash a check at Dominic's.
Yeah.
I find out, 40 years later, there was a bottle of poison Tylenol discovered there. And he left us there. And the most scary part about that, between Lincoln Park Zoo and Bussy Woods, he was wearing a fireman's jacket because he was on the fire department. He was a volunteer fireman in Lyons where we lived, and he was also a police officer in Lyons where we lived.
Uh-huh.
Those were like his little side gigs. And he was wearing his red, and I can see it, it's red fireman's jacket, and it just has a badge on it. It says Lyons Fire Department. Then on the back of it, it says, Lyons Fire Department. In fact, his number on Lyons Fire Department, because I can vision this jacket, it said Lyons Fire Department, number 34. He was LFD, Lyons Fire Department, number 34. Why do I remember that? I have no idea, but I have this mind like a steel trap.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, then, we're on the stairs. He says this to me, and I'm like, my father is capable of killing people. The murders start happening. We don't really have much to do with it. We don't know much about it. There's a day, and I describe it in the book. I'm out and I'm riding my bike, and I just had this overwhelming, like if an 11-year-old could have an epiphany, that's what I had. And I was like, I got to get home and I got to dump the Tylenol because I don't know that anybody's done it. Get home, open up the bathroom cabinet, 2 brand new bottles of Tylenol in there, extra strength. I popped the top off. I mean, it was like 1, 2, 3. There was no seals. You pull the cotton out, and I dumped it. And I'm doing that, and I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, oh my God, I could have probably just saved my family. And then I thought, why wasn't this already dumped? Why was this in the cabinet still after all of this? So again, we had no talk about the Tylenol murders in the house, except I believe it was October 5th or 6th, 1982. I have it exactly the right date in the book. I was in the living room, and in Chicago, we had ABC 7. That was like the news, like my family would watch if we ever watched news. I think it was like the 9 o'clock news. My dad is in his chair. He's like, we got to put the news on. And I was like, oh, God. So I put the news on because I was his remote control. We didn't have a remote control then. Put the news on, and I'm kind of planning an exit out of the room because I don't want to be there with him. There's a clip in a Catholic church of the priest is sprinkling holy water on 3 caskets. It was the caskets of the Janus family who died from the Tylenol.
Yeah, all three members of one family died
Correct.
from
In
Tylenol
Arlington Heights,
poisoning.
Illinois. Yes.
Yeah.
And so they had the funeral mass for all 3 of them at the same time. And ABC 7, I'm sure all of the channels, but this was on channel 7.
Mm-hmm.
They were covering this. And my dad's in the background. And so I'm watching this, and I'm 11, and I'm thinking, I think I have a realization that these were people who died from the poison, but I'm not positive on that. I just know I could feel through the airwaves. Like I felt like I had an empathy and a sympathy for what these people were going through. The people in the church, you could sense the grief coming through the TV. And I was just kind of transfixed on this. And behind me, my dad is quiet. He's not saying a word, not a peep. he's sitting there, and I can tell. I became very observant of him, and I could hear how he's breathing, and I'm like, oh God, what's he doing back there? His breathing changed, and he sat there, and he said, I don't know, can I swear on the show or no?
Yeah, hey,
Yeah.
tell it like it is.
Okay, so I wouldn't do it gratuitously. I'm just repeating what he said. I'm sitting there, and my father's watching the TV, dead silent in the room, and he said, great. 3 fucking holy Catholic martyrs.
Mm-hmm.
We were not Catholic, and my father did not like Catholics. He didn't trust Catholics. He said, don't trust Catholics. So he said, great. 3 holy fucking Catholic martyrs. I'm 11, and I am like repulsed by what he's saying. Like I kind of automatically at that age, I kind of became the adult. And I stood up and I turned around and I said, what does that even mean? I'm
Yeah.
thinking, like, who says something like this? So I said to him, I said, what does that even mean? He's like, none of your fucking business is what it means. And I got enraged. Like, when I get really PO'd, my neck gets red. And I could feel my neck getting red. And I envisioned this. And I said, no, seriously, what does that even mean? And he looked at me. He had a certain look, like you knew when you got that look, don't push it. And he kind of leaned forward. He pointed his finger at me. He said, you know what? If you're so fucking smart, you'll figure it out one day.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Well,
that
that
was the only news coverage that I ever recall seeing
okay.
about the Tylenol murders in our home.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that gives us a little picture of his personality, and you've given it.
Psychopath.
Yeah. That's very psychopathic to try and transfer the guilt over to somebody else,
Right.
in that way that he did maybe towards his death, to just transfer it over to somebody else. That's pretty.
Absolutely. And I use psychopath as just a very broad term to describe him. There's a lot. And I went pretty thorough in the book. I did a full forensic analysis of him.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, what I have in the book was a very, like, I cut it down from a paper that I had actually written while I was working on my PhD. And, we couldn't use the name, and there was a lot of things you couldn't use. So
Yeah.
originally he was patient X in my original paper. So when I was going to put it in the book, I kind of put his name in there, and I took some of the other things out and kind of shrunk it down a little bit for people to read it and not be like, what is he even talking about? But yeah, psychopathy was that's like a cover over everything else. There are so many diagnoses that I gave him.
Mm-hmm.
And there are things that I knew all along. I was like, oh yeah, he's got this. I didn't even have to go to school to know he's a narcissist. Well, he's got narcissistic personality disorder, which is, off the charts then. The
Mm-hmm.
megalomaniac. There's just so many things with him. And so when I wrote the book, I originally, and this is the 100% truth. When I started putting all this together, I did not plan to write a book.
Uh-huh.
I honestly went into this after what he said, and then I found that bottle in the attic. I was like, okay, there's got to be something out here that I can find that's exculpatory. Anything that would say he didn't do this. He was out of town. He was here. He was there. This happened. That happened. And honestly, you become, when you live in an environment like that, you end up protecting your abuser. And
Yeah.
that was exactly what I was doing. Even though I had no love lost for him, I wanted to find anything that would say he didn't do this. And the deeper that I dug and the further I went, the more I found that connects him right back to it.
Yeah. So you
So
found nothing that was exculpatory.
absolutely nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. And in fact, digging through just so much stuff, I found a couple other things that he's got that have his fingerprints all over them. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
working on that now with my brother. So we're actually working together on some of these we found a few other murders that
Uh-huh.
have his fingerprints.
Um, so about, for this show and my interest, it's yeah, the psychopathy concept I thought was always kind of broad,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm looking at behaviors as of all the kind of people that we've profiled and talked about on the show. There's certain features about them, their learning history,
Mm-hmm.
and with your father, then he had an incident early on with poisoning himself. Correct.
Correct.
Yeah. What was that happened to him?
So he was, I've never gotten the exact age from him. And you
Hmm.
could never really ask my father a question and get an answer. It was always followed up with riddles or some other question or
Uh-huh.
something. You never got a yes or a no. So I tried over the years to figure out what age he was, and I've narrowed it down to probably between 4 and 7.
Hmm.
So he was born in 1950. So this would be between 1954 and 1957, just to give a background. He was in his grandmother's house and he was rummaging around, like kids do, in a cabinet in the bathroom, and he found a bottle. And he told me, he's like, oh, it was cherry or maybe it was raspberry. I think it was raspberry. And it was a bottle of medication, and he drank it. And it was a sulfa-based medication. And sulfa was kind of a precursor to modern day antibiotics. So somebody had this in the house and it got stuck under there. Well, he drank the whole thing, which I think, would probably injure anybody. But my father, as it turned out, had an allergy to sulfa. So he
Uh-huh.
ended up in the hospital. This is the mid 1950s. He was in the hospital a few weeks, and he had told me, and he told me several times. He's told my brother, he told everybody that he actually died that day.
Uh-huh.
He said, I died that day. I tasted death, and I came back, and I don't know that I was ever the same.
Hmm.
So he had this vendetta against medications like that. So when you fast forward into the book into 1981, my brother my brother was also very hard to deal with. He was a very rambunctious child, and he had disappeared. We searched everywhere. We looked in the bathroom, we looked down the hall, we looked everywhere. We couldn't find him. Went back in the bathroom, and there he was, and he had found a bottle of liquid children's Tylenol.
Ah.
Red liquid medication, no safety cap. My
Hmm.
brother, we don't know. I mean, I don't know if he drank any of it or what. All I remember was it was a scene. There was this red medicine on the floor, and my father just shook him and then put him over him, and he was like pounding on his back. And I'm like, is he choking? I don't think he's choking. What is going on? So what I equate that to is, my father was reliving what had happened to him in
Uh-huh.
his childhood.
Yeah.
So back in the 1950s, and now we're in like 1981, and it's the exact same thing happened to my brother. He went out, he put latches on every cabinet in the house, and oddly enough, those latches are still there 45 years later. Those exact same latches are still on the cabinets in the bathroom. So if you go in my mom still lives in that house. You go in the house, you go in the bathroom, you got to unlatch it on the side to get in there. So those are still there. And I think, well, not that I think, I am without a doubt, he had a vendetta. So when you fast forward then into 1982, Johnson and Johnson was coming out with children's co-Tylenol, which was a cold Tylenol formula for
Okay.
children, and it was flavored. And I believe they were orange flavored, and they were tablets.
Hmm.
Again, this was before there were child safety caps. So there's a whole scene in the book. I watched my father with a coupon that came in the newspaper for that, and he was like shredding it. And he's like, these MFers are going to kill a kid. That was in 1982. That was in July of 1982. So obviously, then you fast forward into September, and we know what happened in September.
Hmm.
And he had a vendetta, and I'm going to tell you, and I'm sure you understand this because I think you understand this mindset. In my father's mind, I have absolutely no doubt that he thought he was doing the world a favor.
Hmm.
He's a hero in his own mind because after that, 7 people died, right? But how many people didn't die? Because they finally ended up putting childproof caps on things and sealing it up. My father was a psychopath, and that is a psychopathic way to think. I'm the hero. So what if 7 people died? Who cares? That would be absolutely his mentality.
Well, he also had an interest in the Jonestown massacre, where
Mm,
that's nearly 1,000 were killed
yeah.
there in South America of Jim
Yep.
Jones. Yeah.
Yep. I believe it was 911 people died there.
Uh-huh.
So that was in 1978.
Hmm.
We had a lot of things going on in that era in 1978. I had lost a cousin of mine I was very close with. She died on homecoming night. She was in a car accident. A drunk driver hit the car and killed all four of the kids. So
Mhm.
that was September 30th, 78. My brother was born October 15th, 78. And then Jonestown happened. I want to say it was November 9th or November 11th. Anyway, it was all in this very short period of time. And I watched my father after Karen died. And then after my brother was born, my father was changing rapidly. You could see the degression. You could see him going down. And then when Jonestown happened, it was like a light went off in his head. We did not watch much TV. Anything that was on TV, if there was something about Jonestown, he was glued to the TV. The newspapers, the magazine articles, he had kept all of that in what I refer to as his lair. It was his workshop, but I refer to it as his lair. And he had all of the Jonestown clippings in there. He was literally obsessed with that story. There's another incident in the book that happened in 1980 where he was using cyanide to pound into a tree to kill it. And I understood because I asked him what that powder was, and he said cyanide. He's like, "Do you remember the people that died from cyanide a few years ago?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course I do." He's like, "It's the same stuff." And we had a conversation in the car about Jim Jones, very dark conversation about Jim Jones and the People's Temple, where my father told me exactly what had happened and how they put the cyanide in. I'm using this as a generic term, Kool-Aid. I do not believe it was actually Kool-Aid. It was something else.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
There's the term, don't drink the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
And my father was explaining this to me, like how that would happen and how that would work. And then he was just very calm and he said, but that wasn't the original plan. And I'm like, I think at this point I was 10, 11. I'm like, wait, what do you mean that wasn't the original plan? He said he was originally going to use antifreeze and put
Uh-huh.
antifreeze into the Kool-Aid to kill the people. And I was like looking at him and I'm thinking, how do you know this? And why are you telling me this? So I've carried that with me my whole life. So in my father's lair, he had some very interesting literature. And I know you had asked me about that. There was
Yeah.
Anarchist Cookbook. That was the first thing I saw.
I've seen a copy of that when I was
Black and
younger.
white.
I
Yeah.
saw an old copy of that book.
I'm breaking into his lair because it was under lock and key in there. So I'm looking at this book and I'm like, why does he have a cookbook in here? I open it up and there's diagrams of bombs and poison and
Yeah. The Anarchist Cookbook is kind of a maybe an encyclopedia giving instructions on
yeah,
making bombs, poisons,
a lot of
weaponry.
bad things. There's a lot of
Yeah,
bad things.
it's kind of written in the whoever the author was kind of a in a almost a they think they're being funny writing about these
Yeah.
various ways to kill people, but actually giving instructions on
Oh
how
yeah. And
someone with
they
limited means could do this.
absolutely. And it was for people who were like consider themselves to be like revolutionaries.
Hmm.
And that book was terrifying. But I'm going to tell you the other things he had in there, they were pamphlets. They
Okay.
looked like, have you ever seen just like a church bulletin? It's like a couple pieces of paper folded together.
Yeah.
He had stacks of these, and that was the poor man's James Bond.
Okay.
The poor man's James Bond, in my opinion, makes the Anarchist Cookbook look like kindergarten literature. The
Hmm.
poor man's James Bond is darker and it's more sick. It is
Hmm.
really twisted.
Hmm.
So here I am. It's 2024, I believe, at this point, and I'm like, I've got to see what is in this stuff because I never read them in his lair. He
Hmm.
had destroyed all of that stuff after the Tylenol murders. He had a big bonfire with a bunch of stuff from his lair. So 2024, I'm looking around trying to find copies of Poor Man's James Bond, and you can find them. There's PDFs online of it, but I wanted to have like the actual hard copies. So what somebody did along the way was took all of these pamphlets and kind of put them into a bound edition, and so there's actually 3 volumes of the Poor Man's James Bond. So I ordered them from a military store in Oregon. And I'm pretty sure I've said this a million times, and I'm like, I'm positive I'm on the FBI's list for something now. They're watching me because I got
Hmm.
these. But as I'm going through them, and I'm going to tell you what, it was dark. Reading through these, I mean, I had to just shut it down, press save on the computer, and walk away because it is so incredibly dark. But what I found in there, going through them, I found a lot of interesting things. But one thing I found was that this plan with the Tylenol was completely laid out in the poor man's James Bond.
Okay.
There's a section and it says if you want to, if you want to get rid of your enemy, and it used the term enemy, it said get into their medicine cabinet, look for capsules, put cyanide in the capsules.
Okay.
That was from 1969, 1970, 1971, somewhere in there. So well before the Tylenol murders happened. So that was in there. And then as I'm going through, I'm finding other stuff. And this gentleman, Kurt Saxon is his name, he wrote very dark. And he had written this about the antifreeze. And he said, if you really want to be a hit at a party, dump some antifreeze into the punch. And
Okay.
he's saying, you only need a little bit and this and that. And that has got to be where my father understood that Jim Jones was going to use antifreeze instead of cyanide, because I've never heard that theory before other than from him.
Mm-hmm.
And then I read
I
it
never
in,
heard that before.
yeah,
Yeah.
I read it in the poor man's James Bond. And I was like, oh, that must be where he got it from.
Uh, your household, according to the book, what you said, that was a very abusive, violent upbringing, wasn't it?
It was, and I would say, it's beyond that. It was almost ritualistic what we went through. It was very dark in our house and it was very violent.
Mm-hmm.
My brother, who was born in 78, he is 7 years younger than I am. And my sister, who passed away in 2013, I always felt for them because they never saw anything but that. They were both born into this dynamic. Prior to my brother being born, my father was, I would say, we were never a functional family per se, but we were much more functional than we were after my brother was born. So I had like a 7-year time frame before my brother was born that I could compare to what was going on and be like, you know what, this is not normal. This is what I'm used to, and now I'm seeing this. And this
Mm-hmm.
is not normal. And
Mm-hmm.
my heart is always broken for my brother and sister because that's all they knew was the violence and the chaos. And
Mm-hmm.
it was not even like the violence was bad, but it was the chaos that was always ensuing in our house. There was never a moment where there wasn't something chaotic going on.
Mm-hmm.
It stemmed from him.
Mm-hmm. It was in a lot of situations like that, it's not just physical or sexual abuse, it's the emotional abuse
Yes.
going. Yeah.
The physical scars heal, but the emotional ones, I'm 54, I'll be 55 in July, and I'm still unpacking it all. This has
Uh-huh.
been a process my whole life, and it will be the rest of my life, just unpacking it and, looking at what I lived in. And that was another part with the book as well, was I wanted to address what I lived in and what I saw. And hopefully somewhere underneath in this book, people can realize that, like, what we all lived in hell. And you know what, I got out of there and I did something else with my life. And I think there's like that little bit of inspiration in there. Hopefully
Mm-hmm.
maybe one person will read the book and say, hey, he did it, I can do it. That's always
Well,
my hope.
well, from reading that, it looks like you were standing up to him at a pretty young age.
Oh yeah. I Again, because like I told you, I was used to a different version of him. I was used to what you could say was regular Dan. My regular father was, he wasn't very pleasant to begin with. And I was more used to that. But then when Evil Dan, and he referred to himself as Evil Dan, like he would
Mm-hmm.
actually talk about himself, in that third person saying, oh yeah, that was Evil Dan. That wasn't me. That is
Mm-hmm.
actual. So yeah, I learned to stand up to him. My grandma, I talked about it in the book when she really dressed him down one day, and
Yeah.
he would never fully act up when she was around, and I can explain that because I didn't go into it in the book. But the reason behind that was when my father was 13, he was living in Cicero, Illinois, with his mom. She kicked him out because he was horrible. Sent him to
Uh-huh.
live with his father in Willow Springs, Illinois. Willow Springs, Illinois. He was living with his father. His father had gotten remarried, and his wife, her name was Eleanor. And from what I recall, she's a lovely person. She would not put up with my father's crap. So she was
Yeah.
like, you're out. That kid has got to go. He is not staying here. So he left, and he was living under a bridge in Willow Springs at 13, which is rough. I feel for that. That's a rough situation. My grandmother was what I would call, she was just a good Christian woman. She's a good Southern Christian woman. somebody had said, there's a kid living under the bridge. She went and got him. My grandma went and got him from under the bridge, brought him home, and kind of set him up and was, took care of him. So she kind of partially raised him, and he had a respect for her. So the scene in the book, and it happened more than once, but the particular scene in the book when she dressed him down and she was like, you are a hypocrite. You are a hypocrite. You go to church, you act like this, and then you come home and you abuse your family. You're a hypocrite. I see through it. I know what you're up to. And I mean, she totally dressed him down at that point. And after that was when he got what I would call dangerous. It was after that, because I feel like he felt like he was dressed down in front of his family. And he really, that word hypocrite, I mean, I could have at any point in my life after that been like, you know what, Grandma's right, you're a hypocrite.
Yeah.
He would go off the rails. That was like his Achilles heel. You could call him a hypocrite and he would go 0 to 60, and I can't say what he would do. So yeah, it was after that point then, after she dressed him down, that he kind of went off the deep end even more.
So he had an accidental poisoning when he was very young, maybe almost a near-death experience. He had an interest in the Jonestown People's Temple cult that had the mass poisoning, mass murder that took place in South America. And he had the reading of these kinds of books, Anarchist Cookbook, The Poor Man's James Bond, these pieces of literature that basically instruct people on how to kill people in these ways.
Correct.
And he worked, didn't he work at a subsidiary of General Motors? And I'm trying to get at where he would have gotten this cyanide from.
So you got it exactly right.
Yeah.
He worked for a company, and it was called Electromotive. Electromotive was owned by General Motors, and they manufactured locomotive engine parts. He worked in electroplating those engine parts. If you do any type of research about chemicals that are used for electroplating these parts, potassium cyanide is like #1 on the list. He had access to it because he had brought it home prior to use when he was killing the tree that I talked about. And it's in the book where he's killing the tree. So I knew that he could get potassium cyanide. He told me it was, and he was very specific that it was potassium cyanide is what he had. So I know he got it from Electromotive.
I did not know that you could kill a tree with cyanide. You put cyanide on nails, and nail it into the tree.
Yep. So he brought home a bag, and I'll just go through this because I watched this. He came home with these, like a brown paper bag from the hardware store with copper nails. They have to be copper.
Okay.
He put them in a solution of something. And I had put this in the book, and I was like, I don't know what the solution was, because at this point I was 9. The nails sat in there for a few days into the solution, and then he took the nails out of the solution, and it was like a baggie, we would just call it a baggie of this whitish, yellowish powder. Not super fine, but not coarse either. And he put on gloves. He had me step back, and he was holding the bag out, and he would drop a couple nails in at a time. And I'm not lying, there was like a little of smoke. So these nails then, they were still damp from the solution. Now they were coated in this powder. So he took these nails to that tree where he had pre-drilled some holes, and he took a hammer and he just very lightly tapped them in place. And that was in August of 1980. And by 1982, when I'm commenting on the state of this tree, the tree was dead. He had done this all along the base of the tree and up and down the tree. So you could see, like, if you walked up to that tree, you'd be like, what is going on with that tree? There was nails in there that had cyanide on them. And that's what killed the tree. So I've researched that. I'm like, is that even possible? Apparently, yes, it is. So anybody needs to kill a mulberry tree.
Okay. Very violent, abusive man, serious personality problems. What would have been his motive to do this?
His motive?
Yeah.
I think, honestly, because he could.
I
think I have dissected this. I feel like this was something he was doing that would lead to something more. I honestly have always thought, like, he did not stop with this, or he was not planning to stop with this. And my father, knowing how his brain worked, he did not ever expect anybody would have discovered that it was the Tylenol as quickly as they did. It
Mm-hmm.
was only because of a nurse, and her name was Helen Jensen. Her name is Helen Jensen. She's still alive. She's 88 now. She went to the Janus home after the 3 people died in there because nobody had any idea why all these people are dying. And then 3 people in one house. They thought there's a gas leak. They think there's poison food. They think there's something going on in the house, and they're not finding anything. And apparently, from what I know, she saw the bottle of Tylenol sitting there, and she's like, okay, I'm just going to open this up. It's a brand new bottle. There were 6 pills missing. There's 3 people dead. Adult dose is 2 pills. 6 pills missing, 3 people dead. You do the math. And she's like, it's got to be the Tylenol. And they're like,
Uh-huh.
Tylenol. They kind of butted heads with her. And then there was a gentleman there, and I think he was a fireman. And he said, wait a minute. He said, there was a little girl who died yesterday in Elk Grove Village, which is just south of there, in Elk Grove Village from Tylenol. She took a Tylenol and she died, but they didn't realize that it was the Tylenol then.
Uh-huh.
So that's when they had sent our stuff off to it was 1982. I don't know that there was labs around right in the area, but somebody drove this stuff to a lab to find out what is in this Tylenol. And that's when they're like, shit, there's cyanide in this Tylenol. Stop Tylenol. That was when it all blew up. And I think my father was sitting there like, oh, shit. They figured out it's the Tylenol. But I honestly feel like there was more things he had planned. I cannot tell you how many times my father told me around 9/11, after 9/11 happened, he said, do you know how easy it is for somebody to get into like the milk in the grocery store and put poison in there? He's telling me this in 2001. He had this whole thing devised of how you could put cyanide into the water supply to kill massive amounts of people. I mean, he was telling me this. And yeah, I think he had bigger things planned, and I don't think he did it. Maybe he did something else more. I don't know, but nothing like this. I think he stopped after this. He realized like I could get caught.
As far as is known, do we know all the victims of the Tylenol poisonings? Is it possible there's others that died that
Yeah,
we
I
never knew
believe there
about?
could be. Absolutely. Because there were the 7 who died that we know of, and they're the
Yeah.
7 that people always will refer to. I feel like I don't feel like those are the only bottles he put out there. I feel like if there were more bottles anywhere, they would be in that area in the perimeter of Bussy Woods, because that was where he left us. We were there for an hour and 27 minutes approximately. So you figure an hour and a half. I drove these locations, and to get from Bussy Woods, where he left us, across the highway to Woodfield Mall is 2.6 miles. It takes 4 minutes. And then from there up to Arlington Heights, it's another like 7 minutes. Then from Arlington Heights down to Elk Grove Village, I think it was like 11 minutes. I mean, he had plenty of time. I'm telling you that there were probably more bottles there.
Mm-hmm.
And
There is a technology or a practice of geographic profiling that they use for serial killers, serial rapists, things like that, to try and identify where they probably are.
I've seen that.
Mathematical. This would be very special because he's going to stores or pharmacies, and it's interlocking in a certain geographic area.
Yep. And I mean, like I did it old school style. Driving those locations and seeing, okay, this was 7 minutes to here. He had plenty of time to get to all the locations where bottles were found, and there could be a lot more that were out there that, maybe somebody bought and they're like, oh no, I'm going to dump it now. I honestly, I feel that. And I found some interesting things along the way prior to the murders. We grew up in a town called Lyons, and this is not, I mean, it's going to sound a little bit conspiracy theorish, but it's actually not. It's factual. We grew up in Lyons. There's another town 4 minutes away called Summit. Right before the Tylenol murders, there were they had been originally labeled as drug overdoses.
Okay.
When the Tylenol murders happened, the Cook County medical examiner started going back for anything that had looked mysterious and rerunning, tissue samples or blood samples, checking for cyanide. And there were 3 or 4 of these mysterious drug overdoses that were actually cyanide deaths. And
Uh-huh.
that is in Summit, which was just 4 minutes from our house.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always said, I'm like, my father was a cop. That was his side gig, and he was a dirty cop. I think
Uh-huh.
that those deaths that were related to cyanide that happened prior to the murders, that was like a test run. That was a test run for him. And then
Um,
poor man's James Bond says, if you want to test your poisons, you can try it on a homeless person, or it said a wino in the book. So
all
it makes
right.
perfect sense that he could have put some form of a drug together and got it out to these people, just through a dealer or through something. He was crooked. And these people died from cyanide poisoning, and it was not related to the Tylenol. Yet it was right prior to that, and it was 4 miles from our house. So
Uh, well, it makes me wonder at this stage. I mean, there was a massive investigation, and
mhm.
one person was convicted in related to this, right? Of trying
Correct.
to extort money.
It
It
was
looks like
extortion.
they had nothing to do with the
No,
putting together of the poisons, but they were trying to capitalize on this in
they
some
were
kind of
trying to.
way.
Yes, this guy James Lewis. He was in New York. He had lived in Chicago previously, but he was in New York. He his wife had been terminated, or it was like her last check bounced from a travel agent in Chicago when she had worked for him, and
Hmm.
he had a vendetta against this guy. So when the Tylenol murders were happening in Chicago, he's in New York, and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to get him." He sent a letter to Johnson and Johnson saying, "If you want the killings to stop, you better wire $1 million to this bank account." And it was her former boss's bank account. He was trying to frame the guy. I
Yeah.
mean, is that a brilliant move? No, it was not. So they tracked him down and they arrested him, and he was prosecuted and went to prison for extortion.
Hmm.
But most people think that that was the end of the story, but no, he had zero to do with the actual murders. In fact, he died also in 2023. I believe it was June. And to his deathbed, he's like, I had nothing to do with the Tylenol murders. Yes, I wrote the extortion letter, and that was stupid, but I had nothing to do with the murders. And
Yeah.
I think when they really started focusing in on him, it was in October of 82. I think my dad just kind of sat back and was like, all right, I'm going to let this guy take the fall. He destroyed everything in the lair. I wrote very thoroughly about that, and a lot of the items that he had in there that he burned. And I think he was like, I'm home free. And he just kind
Yeah.
of carried it with him.
Were there any other suspects they were looking at for
There
this
was a few
case?
people from Chicago. There was a guy who actually worked for Jewel Foods, which was where several of the bottles were bought at different Jewel food stores, but he had nothing to do with it. And there was another guy, and somebody had said, like, I think he's got cyanide in his house and blah blah blah. So when they went to his house, he didn't have cyanide there, but he did have I believe he had poor man's James Bond there. And they had harassed him and stuff, but he had nothing to do with it. I mean, he had nothing to do with this. And when you look at the locations where the bottles were discovered, where people died, I mean, we were in all those locations. The store
Wow.
in Winfield, I mean, if you were from the Chicagoland area, especially then, Warrenville and Winfield are way out. It was the cornfields. It was the middle of nowhere. But yet a bottle popped up there when my uncle and one of my dad's friends from high school both lived in Warrenville, both under 3 miles to Frank's Finer Foods in Winfield. We were there all the time. I talked about a specific time when we were there for a party, but we were there all the time. I mean, he could have put more out there for all I know. We were there all the time. It's just the way it lines up was I took the facts of what we know about the Tylenol murders and I overlaid my timeline with it.
Yeah.
And it's literally like 1 + 1 = 2. Every dot connects, every line connects. And,
Hmm.
you know, and then when you tie that up with his deathbed declaration, not
Yeah.
just saying cyanide pills, I did it, but talking about the 3 Marys who should still be here. One was so young. And, in my opinion, him saying, I'm going to get blamed for something, so I'm just going to admit it now. And then saying cyanide pills again. I really
Mm.
think that he had this thought, like, I was going to put this together. And
Hmm.
I was not even putting it together at the time until he said that. And I talk in the book about a journal that went missing. And this is actually, it's pretty important. And I didn't highlight it, emphasize it enough in the book. In about 1986, I started writing a journal and where I was just keeping track of weird things he did. Because I always thought, I think I've always meant to be a lawyer in my head. I always was like, I got to document what this guy's doing. So I went back and I wrote about all our weird excursions in 1982. I wrote about all our little excursions in the woods where he was teaching me how to stalk people. Every little weird thing he did from, prior to 1982 up until 1986, 87, 88, the journal went missing. I had it very well hidden in my room and it went missing. And I talk about this in the book because he had been hanging around by my room and I'm like, what's he doing? Next day, the journal's gone. So fast forward now to 2019. I don't do social media very much at all, but my husband does. So my father was sending my husband messages via Facebook Messenger. This was in 2019. He said the very first message, which we can't find the actual screenshot of it, but he had said, I've got a journal of Joey's. It's very interesting. I can't wait to come show it to you. This is in 2019. And then right after that, probably about 2 weeks after that, he started sending these messages. And one of them said, I know where you are, JR. My name's Joseph Robert. I know where you are, JR. Can't wait to see you soon. And then the next one was, I hope
you were kind of estranged from him at that
yeah,
point?
I had actually changed my last name at that point.
Yeah, right.
And he's like, I know where you are, JR. You can run, but you can't hide.
Yeah.
And then the next message he sent to my husband was, I hope you guys have a happy new year because it's going to be the last for one of you. This was him. And the very first message was about the journal. The journal that went missing was my journal where I was documenting all his crazy shit he did.
Mm-hmm.
And I am positive he took that journal and he held on to it. So I don't know what happened to that journal. I imagine he destroyed it.
Was
after
it
2019.
was it a theory by your husband or someone else that your father may have been test running to kill his family or members of
I
his
really
family?
do think that. Yeah, my husband actually had said that.
Yeah.
It just, when I was putting all this together, it was overwhelming. It was like every day I was finding new stuff and things were flying at me and people were reaching back out to me to tell me stories about my dad and what happened and what they saw and what they know. And then Craig, my husband, comes up with the story. He's like, I think he kind of understood my father's psychopathy. He's like, I could absolutely have seen your father wanting to kill you guys in the family, and it would just look like all the other deaths.
Well, he's very much like a family annihilator, which I've done.
Absolutely.
I've done a
Oh, yes.
podcast on those
Oh, yeah. I did a few deep dives researching that, and I'm like, oh yeah, he checks every box for a family annihilator. And the thing that it's shocking to me, and I think it could have been true, if you relate back to what I said when I went back home and there was 2 brand new bottles in the cabinet. The other thing is, in that house in 1982, the only people who would have taken Tylenol would have been my father, my mother, or me. My brother was too young to be taking any, capsules of Tylenol. And my sister was still, she was like a year old at that point. So she would not have been taking that. So I fully believe that my father would have loved to have gotten rid of us. I dumped it though. But here's the other part. My father had sort of a hero complex. Like I told you, he had to be the hero in his own story. I could have seen him taking it a step further, letting one of us get that Tylenol. And at that time, I did the research. They had cyanide antidote kits in the ambulances, especially at that time. You had about an hour. The cyanide antidote kit would slow it down, but you had to get to the hospital. And I could absolutely 100% have seen my father wanting us to take the Tylenol and then giving us the antidote kit. And then he would have been our hero. Look in the book, he wears his Superman shirt all the time. He wanted to be a hero. So what bigger hero would there be? Like, my father saved me from the Tylenol, I haven't talked about that topic as much, but it is a very interesting little part of this whole story.
So he would put this out in Tylenol capsules. A bunch of people would die. Mm-hmm. He was assuming that they would not connect it to Tylenol. They would just report it as mysterious deaths, perhaps.
Correct.
And then he would know, yeah, I've probably has to do it to a lot of bottles to get enough data to say, yeah, it's working. It does
Yep.
kill people. And then he could use it for his own purposes, which is possibly to kill
With
his
the
own
family.
family.
And it may have not even been in the Tylenol. He may have put it in our,
Well,
milk.
yeah,
He may have put it in something else so that we would just, we would have fallen over dead and he'd be like, oh my God, I don't know.
yeah,
Everybody's dying from cyanide around here.
yeah,
When you look at the location of our house, it's like, bam, right in the center of all this. But there are none that are directly right around the house. They're all just slightly out from the house,
yeah.
except for the mysterious deaths in Summit
Hmm.
that were related to cyanide that was right before this. And I think that I've got to do more research on that. But that was, if he was testing it out there, he was like, oh yeah, it's working. People are dying. Okay, off we go.
Okay. So they had this massive investigation. Was he ever named as a suspect? Was he on the
I
radar of anything?
I cannot I cannot answer that. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have reached out with to the Arlington Heights, Illinois Police Department since day one, working
Uh-huh.
on this. And that started because when I put this together and I laid my timeline over the facts and was connecting all the dots, I'm like, oh yeah, he did this. So I had tracked down one of a victim, a survivor of the victims from the Janus family. I found a niece. So she lost two uncles and an aunt that day. And I found her and I called her and we had a conversation. And I mean, it was very tearful. And I told her about my timeline, how everything adds up. And I'm like, and I did not even tell her about the bottle that I found. I did not go into all the detail with her. But I said to her, I said, I'm starting to put a book together. And she's like, well, I absolutely want to read it when it's done. And I said, before I get to that point, though, what would you want me to do with this information? I wanted to give her a little bit of her own power back. And I
Yeah.
said, you tell me what you want me to do with this, and I'll do it.
Hmm.
And she said, if you 100% think your father did this, please call the Arlington Heights Police Department because they
Okay.
have the Tylenol task force. Well, I hung up the phone with her. I think it was 2:13 in the afternoon. 2:21, I'm on the phone with Arlington Heights. I got nothing. There was no
Hmm.
Tylenol task force, according to the people I talked to. They put me in touch with an investigator, left him a message. I had given him 48 hours. I said, if he doesn't call me back, I'm calling again. Called him again 48 hours later. Didn't hear anything back for about 8 or 10 days. I did talk to a detective. He took a lot of, he asked me very good questions, which I was able to answer. And he said, can you send me a timeline or can you send me information on this? So he had actually sent me an email so that I would have his email address. So I reached out to a friend of mine in Chicago, Kelly. She used to be a criminal attorney. So I reached out to her. I said, look, she knew what was going on. I said, I got to come up with something to give to them that they can use. So she was working on stuff. And then I kind of finished the beta version of the book and I sent it to her. I'm like, will you just read this and see if this works? So she read it and she's like, Joe, you have my blessing 100%. Send it to them because everything you wrote in there is like evidence. Everything is evidence in there. So I sent
Hmm.
it to them, but I've never heard anything.
Okay. Well, if they had the bottles from the crime scenes in evidence with what they can do with DNA now,
I know, absolutely.
they might be able to connect some things. They get
Yeah.
some
And that
direct
was,
evidence.
oh, yeah, that was involved in my conversation with investigator. His last name is Dudek, Dudek. I had told him, I said, I'll take a swab. The DNA that you've got in a bottle, they're like, there's some DNA that we found in bottles. And I said, I will take a swab and you can compare it to that. And then he also told me, he said, there was no chain of command in 1982. He said that DNA that's in the bottle could have been from anybody because people didn't wear gloves and there really wasn't a chain of command. So he said, if you did a swab, he's like, even if it matched the DNA that's in there, he's like, that doesn't mean that that was the DNA of the person who did this. So, he was ruling it out before we could even rule it in. And my brother has also reached out to them and said the same thing. I mean,
Hmm.
I told the guy, I was like, I'll fly out there tomorrow. I'll come to your office and you can swab me right there. I
Yeah.
will do that. I have no,
He's gonna get your DNA
yeah,
to match it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But he told me, he said, even if it matched, that doesn't mean your father did it. And he said, and if it didn't match, that doesn't mean your father didn't do it. So they're with them. I've just been kind of sitting back and waiting, and I've kept them informed about what's going on with the book. And then when the book was coming out, I let them know that this is coming out, and this is going to be, people are going to start asking questions of you. At some point, people will ask you questions, and you just need to know this is coming.
Yeah.
So, I've maybe I made them squirm a little bit. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll see what they do.
Yeah. So it could go somewhere from here. It could
Yeah.
develop further.
And I'll tell you, behind the scenes, there was a guy that worked with my dad on the fire department, and this was after the murders. And I'd had a really good conversation with him, and he was the one. He said, "You know what? You need to get your father's military records because you're going to learn a lot in there." And then he told me, he said, "Your father had a deep," and that was the word he used, deep knowledge of chemicals and chemistry.
Uh-huh.
He had been on the fire department in Lyons, so he texted me. It was probably about not even a week ago, and he's like, "Joe," he's like, "I know people on the Arlington Heights Police Department. They have been asking what I know about this book," because he told them, his friends, he's like, "You guys got to look at this." So I don't know who it is who's looking at it now, but I sent him the same copy of the book that you have, the media copy. I sent that to him, and I'm like, "Please distribute this to whoever wants it at the Arlington Heights Police Department. Here's my number. Here's my email. Here's my address.
Yeah.
Give it to them, because I've been sitting here waiting to talk to them."
Yeah.
So fingers crossed.
Okay. Since we mentioned that some of those crazy books and pamphlets, the Anarchist Cookbook, Poor Man's
Uh-huh.
James Bond, in this day and age, do you have any thoughts about, uh, should if they could ban things like that, how should they
Mhm.
handle things like that? Back then, it seems like in ages past, something like the Anarchist Cookbook, not everybody had access to that.
No, you
People could
couldn't
get
go to
it,
your. Yeah, you had to mail order that stuff, and I know that's what he did. He had like Soldier of Fortune magazine and stuff like that.
right?
That's where he was ordering these from. So
Yeah.
you had to go into these magazines and find it, and then they would mail it to you. So because I did finish my PhD, and I just started into my last year of law school, so I can actually kind of look at this through a quasi attorney's eye as far as First Amendment
Hmm.
rights go. Objectively, you have the First Amendment right, correct? So these books having been written and having been analyzed, and the government has looked at them and they haven't been able to pull it, there is that freedom of speech there. However, my opinion is putting something like this out is reckless,
Yeah.
because there's been a lot of incidents over time that have happened that have been tied to these. And then there's so many things that are tied to these that people don't even know.
Yeah.
I do not believe anybody knows, until I've been banging this drum, that the Tylenol murders is laid out in the poor man's James Bond. It's telling you, like, 1, 2, 3, this is how you do it. And so it's reckless. It's absolutely reckless to do, but we have that freedom of speech. And if it's censored, if something like that is censored, it's like, where does it begin and where does it
Yeah.
end? You have to
Yeah.
ask that question. Where does the censorship start, and then where does it end? you know
Yeah.
I am opposed to these books, of course, because I see the potential they have for horrible things. However, that person has the right to say what they want to say.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah.
it's just in days past, there was always some kind of a filtering process. You had to go, either a publisher wouldn't publish it, you had to mail
Hmm.
order it from Soldier of
Correct.
Fortune. It was a slowing it down, but can I find that online? Can I just look up Anarchist Cookbook and Poor Man's James Bond as a
Oh
PDF
yeah,
out there?
you can find.
Nowadays,
You could
anyone
go
can
on
get
there.
it.
The second we're off of this, you could go on there and put in PDF of the poor man's James Bond, and
Yeah.
you'll find it.
Yeah.
You got to download it, and it's a big file. Or, I found it and I was able to order it from a store in Oregon. It was a military supply store, like a
Yeah.
survivalist type place. And my father was like that. He was a survivalist type. So he
Yeah.
Soldier of Fortune. You got it from the back of the magazine. You sent in your check or whatever, and they'd mail it to you. And I equated it to the dark web of the time. So
Yeah, for sure.
but it's available out there. I don't want your listeners to go look at it and do
Yeah.
anything, but again,
Yeah.
you have free speech. It's reckless to put out there, but what you're going to do with it is up to you.
Okay. So for you, where's your career go from here? It's pretty
No,
amazing story how it's
I
come
have
about.
absolutely no idea. I thought, like,
Uh-huh.
I had this all in my head, finishing the PhD. I got a year of law school left. I wanted to go for criminals. I wanted to do criminal work. And now I'm like, I have no idea. I feel like, I mean, what I'm diving into next with stuff that my father, I'm positive, was associated with. I've told people, I'm like, this could keep me busy for quite a while digging
Yeah.
into this stuff because with the Tylenol murders, I mean, I was a witness. I mean, I lived inside of that. I saw what he was doing. So I came from within inside of that. That one was, I don't want to say it was easy to write, but it was my own recollection. It was my eyewitness testimony of what I saw. However, the other things that he was involved in, that my brother and I are working on now, that is a little more old school detective work. So
Okay.
those will take me a little bit longer. But I think, doing this, I feel like I told my friend Kelly, the attorney in Illinois, I said, I think I found my niche.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, it sounds like you have.
Yeah. And I feel because nobody ever listened to me as a kid, I'd call the cops and he's beating up my mom, he's beating up my family, whatever. Nobody ever listened to me. And I feel like I have just a very small platform right now. And I want to use that. I mean, there are so many people who don't get listened to. People,
Yeah.
when you come out with a story like this, people think that you're the one who's crazy. You know, that's how people will view it. So I put this into writing so I could put it out, very nicely, and I feel like I've got just a little bit of a platform now to help people who may not be being listened to.
Yeah. Maybe it's a kind of a compensation bringing your father to justice. He's gone now, but
Mhm.
bringing him to justice after he put so much onto you.
Yeah.
Now the reverse of it, some of it is at least
And
going on to him.
I wanted to use it not just, for that, but also he trained me to do this. Honestly, if you read the book, you'll see he was training us for something. And I'm going to take that training, but I want it to use it to help people, not to
Yeah.
hurt
Yeah.
people. So
Yeah.
I feel like that I've got that with the PhD and then a JD behind my name. There's a lot of things I can do. I can cause a lot of ruckus with those
Yeah.
two things and get
Yeah.
things stirred up. And that's what I plan to do. So we'll see where that goes.
Okay. Greatly appreciated. It's a great book. Uh, I don't know quite what to compare it to, a story like this, but the Tylenol murders, a father's confession to his son, Dr. Joseph Cibelli. It's in Wild Blue Press.
Mm-hmm. It's on
Okay.
Amazon.
Of course, it is on Amazon too, like everything else. So,
And can I put my website with you?
yeah, go ahead.
It's my name, josephcibelli.com. And I'm not selling anything on there. But there are pictures that are on the website that for whatever reason, Wild Blue did not put into the book. And if you read the book, when you see these pictures, you'll know exactly what you're looking at. And I feel like they're important. And for whatever reason, Wild Blue didn't put them in the book.
Okay.
So I feel like that's a super important thing is to see these pictures.
JosephChipelli.com.
Yep, josephcibelli.com.
Okay. We'll look for it. Dr. Cibelli, greatly appreciated. And
Thank you,
maybe we'll
doctor.
thank you, and we'll see. Maybe there'll be a follow-up someday.
Oh, it's in the process right now. Give me a little
Okay.
time.
All right. Have a
Thank you,
great night.
sir. You too. I appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.